Thank you. Yeah, I would like to first start to thank you to Dermot and to all organizing team for a great conference and for inviting me second year in a row to present. It's a great pleasure to be part of today's team and to discuss those changes in the new directive. What I would like to talk today about is the procurement of innovation and in practical perspective of a new procedure, which is the innovation partnership. The point that I would like to make is there is a certain shift of focus from procedural aspects to contractual requirements of procurement agreement, especially in that procedure. I would like to start with some introductory remarks regarding innovation. Then I would like to briefly point out some of the ways to procure innovation in EU procurement directives, which could be called predecessors of innovation partnership. And the aim, briefly, to go through those is to point out certain benchmarks towards which we can assess if actually the innovation partnerships bring something new and is able to overcome existing challenges. Afterwards, I will focus on the newly introduced innovation partnership, and I will divide my presentation into two stages, and I believe that in the same way we can actually divide the provision in itself. So the part that discusses the procedure in the procurement process and the structure of the innovation partnership in itself. Finally, in the last part of my presentation, I would conclude my presentation and hopefully will manage to answer the question, do we have more flexibility or not really? When it comes to the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, what's the innovation? And until now, we didn't have the definition in itself, but with introduction of new procedure, we also have introduced innovation definition. From one hand, I believe that we can account it on plus from perspective that it limits the possibilities to abuse the usage or calling something an innovative project when actually the innovation is extremely incidental and actually does not have anything to do with development of innovation itself. But on the other hand, something that Pedro already pointed out yesterday, we can observe that actually this definition is designed in a way that it makes it straight away formation which will go out of date in 2020. Because if we're referring to support the Europe 2020 strategy, the question is then what we're doing in 2021 and 2022. So therefore I believe that in regards to that specific element, pointing it out in the definition in this form is possibly not the best solution. When it comes to introduction of the topic, I would like to first think about what type of a contract a development of innovation may be. And from that perspective, I would raise up an opinion that we could quite often say that innovation contract could be counted as a public-private partnership contract. And that is due to the reason that they both will be a type of contract which will be a high value, that will involve a long-time contractual agreement, and they will also involve a very close collaboration between partners. Of course, also the financial, technical, and legal complexity is present in both of them. And from that reason, we can see the similarities between these two. If we will deal with the contract that actually can be classified as PPP contract, it will have its consequences in regards to procurement law. As Court of Justice already pointed out in its judgment that PPP contracts may be accounted as a type of mixed contract. And then depending if such a mixed contract will be judged as inseparable one or separable one, the consequences will be different. As in the case of mixed contracts, we will decide on legal qualification of a contract on the basis of the main purpose of the contract. And if we're dealing with a contract that is inseparable and the main purpose of the contract falls outside of the scope of the directive, then the whole project will fall outside of it. Of course, then the question is, on what basis we're deciding in contract is inseparable one or separable one, and that's actually very unclear and still not answered by the court or by the Commission question. However, moving forward to the question how we actually can promote innovation in public procurement. The delivery of the innovation can actually be promoted in several ways. We can encourage it by using, among others, such tools as availability of submitting variants or functional description of technical specification. However, in these options, we do not have a possibility of negotiation between partners, and also that can introduce a certain vagueness and a certain risk of comparing apples and oranges. So will we actually deal with the same issue or a different one? From that reason, the next element that I would like to move on is to talk about the two procedures that actually allow us to deal with the procurement of innovation and have a certain scope of negotiations. First is the pre-commercial procurement. So the aim of such a procurement is to award a contract with the objective to develop an innovation or an improved product. The thing is that when we're dealing with pre-commercial procurement, we will still need to then develop innovation and commercial market in accordance with the directives. However, the pre-commercial procurement in a situation where this research and development services other than those where the benefits occur exclusively to the contracting authority, and when the service is provided wholly remunerated by the contracting authority. Besides those, all the others can be seen that can be procured without requirement of applying directive. However, the main downfall of this approach is that we will need to deal with conflict of interest. And conflict of interest will occur in a situation that tenderer who will be involved in pre-commercial procurement will need to compete again afterwards in the commercial tender. And the fact is that for majority of companies, that's actually what they're interested in, because that's where the money lies. However, the issue may be that obviously contracting authorities obliged to make sure that they fulfill the transparency and non-discrimination clauses, but at the same time that they won't give a competitive advantage to the partner that they already work with. And that conflict of interest in the new directive is discussed in Article 24. However, the point that I would like to make is on the basis of Fabricant case, it was already established that we cannot apply a general ban of allowing a partner that was involved in any tender-related proceedings beforehand to actually participate in the tender itself. To escape this issue of two double certain tender competition situation for the potential bidder, what contracting authorities is trying to do is actually to procure both elements in one procedure. And one of the procedures that actually we could have a look at would be a competitive dialogue. And to point out an example, let's say that municipality of City Aarhus in Denmark would like to develop innovative beds and then at the same time deliver them to hospital. And to meet that aim, they would like to conclude a public-private partnership contract. In such a situation, we will deal with two sets of challenges. First of all, we will deal with the contract classification issue, because then what we are deciding for the main purpose to be, if that's innovation, it falls outside of the directive, most probably, and then again we had the issue pre-commercial situation. Therefore, we would need to classify it as a delivery of beds, and if we would do that, then of course the aim could be met without achieving actually the innovation, and we're not actually interested in delivery of any type of beds, but those specific ones where the emphasis would be added. The second set of challenges would regard the procedural challenges. Of course, we could see that such a contract potentially would fulfill the requirements of competitive dialogue of being complex in regards to its legal makeup, financial or technical one, as the price could not be decided at the beginning, because we need to know how much innovation we actually succeed in delivering. Another point is that Article 30, paragraph 3 of the directive points out that a dialogue, the aim of which shall be to identify and define the means best suited to satisfy their needs. And the fact is that such a solution would not be met in the dialogue stage. What is also interesting is the main purpose that would be identified in such a contract, which would be the delivery of beds, actually would not be discussed to large extent in the dialogue stage, because that would be the point in which the innovation would be the most important aspects. From the provision, it also follows that the dialogue should be continued until the solution is identified. And of course, it can be seen that no bidder would be willing to be involved in such an extensive time and extensive in resources process with no guarantees of winning it. Therefore, having in mind all those challenges that the companies as well as the contracting authority were dealing until now, the new directive introduces the innovation partnership. The aim of the innovation partnership is the development of the innovative product, service of works, and subsequent purchase of the resulting supply service of work. So it can be seen that in a certain form, it combines the pre-commercial procedure of innovating new solutions and the commercial aspect of actually buying the subsequent contract. The provision in Article 31, which introduces the innovation partnership, may be, as I already mentioned, divided into two aspects. The one that is regarding the procedure in itself, and the one that is regarding the structure. When it comes to the procedure, contracting authority should indicate which elements of the tender constitutes the minimum requirements and which must be met by all tenders, and these requirements cannot be changed throughout the tender, as well as awarding criteria, as Sarah already pointed out. Also what is allowed in that procedure is the negotiations. We need to respect the confidentiality, and at some point the changes of technical specifications are allowed. And with that last aspect, the question is, should we read the part of the Article 31 in context of the structure or in the context of the bidding stage? And the part that I'm referring to is regarding the cherry picking. And to point out what I mean about this issue, I would like to compare the competitive dialogue innovation partnerships in that requirement. As we know, when the competitive dialogue was introduced in 2004, the concept of cherry picking was pointed out. There was a lot of negative feedback from the market. The market felt that would be disadvantageous for them. Therefore, that was largely limited and prohibited in large extent. What I'm considering and what I would like to point your attention to is there a certain scope of cherry picking in an innovative partnership? When we look at the regulations regarding competitive dialogue, besides the prohibition on sharing the confidential information, it is also prohibited to share with others proposed solutions. And that needs to be read in the conjunctions with an old Article 29, paragraph 6, which implied that final tender need to be submitted on the basis of the solution developed by the bidder in the dialogue stage. When we will look at the Article 31 Innovation Partnership, it points out that in accordance with Article 21, which regards the confidentiality, the contracting authority shall not reveal solutions proposed or other confidential information communicated by the partner in the framework of the partnership. And I would like to point your attention to that specific part. In innovation partnership with several partners without a partner's agreement. The question is, should this part of the provision be read in context of the bidding stage or in the context of implementation stage, or maybe both? I think that or maybe differently, what I would like to put to the discussion is the argumentation why we should, or if it's possible at all for us to interpret actually that specific element in context of implementation stage. I believe that there are certain arguments pro that interpretation. For example, the fact that in the innovation partnerships, there are allowed changes of technical specification after a round of negotiation. Also, contracting authority is obliged to give adequate time to modify and resubmit tender by the tenders. And it also refers only to confidential information, but not to sharing of the solutions. The sharing of the solutions is only pointed out if the partnerships is with several partners and in the scope of framework of the partnerships. There is also no similar reference as it is in competitive dialogue to pointing out that the final tender needs to be submitted on the basis of own solution developed during the negotiations. Of course, the opposite view could be that technical specifications can be changed not only in the scope of actually using any form of solutions or any form of confidential information. It actually can be just solely due to the purpose that contracting authority during the time of negotiations became more aware of what actually they want to gain, and they just in more specific way are able to define the needs, and from that sole reason they will change the specification. Therefore, that there is counter-argument saying that that may not have anything to do with actually cherry picking. Second part of the provision regards the structure, and the structure should be the innovation partnerships should be constructed in consecutive stages following the research process, possibly but not necessarily to the manufacturing of the supply of the provision work of services. After each phase, there is a possibility to terminate or reduce the participants' amount. Of course, the issue that would be extremely important in the context of innovation partnerships is how we're dealing with intellectual property rights. And that's a huge question that I could probably just spend 20 minutes only on that, and that wouldn't even scratch the surface. The provision also refers to how long the contract will last and what should be the financial scope of remuneration for private partner, and how the progress should be documented. In regards to the wording of the provision and the part regarding the structure, there are several wording uncertainties that is introduced. Exactly how should we understand the research process? From which A to which B that will be defined. Also, what market pool incentives is? What is the scope and what benchmark to that we should apply? And finally, the aspect that that I think introduced certain inconsequence and certain uncertainty regards to the part regarding the value and duration of the subsequent purchasing contract. This part of the provision has been revamped from the original proposal, and the uncertainty follows from the part of the provision regarding the value and duration. The scope has been narrowed from pointing out that the value and duration should be within appropriate limits and it should allow to achieve an adequate profit, to current version of the directive pointing out that the value actually should not be disproportionate in relation to the investment requirement for their development. So there is certain narrowing down of the concept, as you can see probably that the risk of adequate solutions or adequate profits and appropriate limits can be actually disproportionate. So right now we have a certain narrowing down of that concept, which I believe that we can account on plus. However, there is still similar inconsistency and confusion as in original draft, and it is not fully understandable for me why the cost incurred during the development stage should have impact on the price of the purchasing contract. The costs that the private bidder incurred during that development of innovation seem to be incorporated actually into the earlier stage of innovation partnership, as they should be compensated on every stage of the innovation process when meeting the intermediate targets that are pointed out in Article 31.2. Therefore, my conclusion would be, is it more flexible or is it hardening of the solutions regarding innovation innovation in the procurement process? Flexibility, yes, because we can collaborate, we can negotiate, and it's more holistic approach to innovation, as we do not have the conflict of interest anymore. Hardening, I believe that innovation partnerships introduce a huge burden of contractual awareness of contracting authority and the details and complexity of the post-tender phase. Therefore, time and resources will be extremely high, and small contracting authorities can really have a hard time to apply that partnership.
Great, thank you very much.